and welcome to this webinar on reverse outlines, titles, and abstracts. I'm Christina Quinn, the Director of CSU Rights, and this is a webinar that was part of our Right to Publish series, and you can participate in the Right to Publish course itself as a non-credit course and kind of build out an article for publication, or you can attend some of the workshops as just webinars and information sessions. So we're going to talk a little bit about titles at the start because, well, that's the first thing that you encounter when you're looking at an article and to see if it's relevant to your research area and study. And Wendy Belcher, who has written a book called Write Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks, which is a great resource guide. She's at Princeton University. She just reminds us that articles with strong titles, solid abstracts, and compelling introductions are more likely to be accepted for publication, more likely to be read, and more likely to be cited. And the goal, of course, is not to have your work only published, but it's also to have it cited. So you want to make sure that it's relevant, that it's clearly understood to be relevant. And there are some tips and tricks that she has for doing that. In part because your article is going to be, your title is just like the thing that people are going to catch on to. And you can think about as you go through your own literature reviews and how you decide what is relevant or not relevant to spend time reading and citing, chances are titles play a huge part in your selection. So what to do and what to avoid. Wendy Belcher reminds us that broad titles oftentimes serve well for books or maybe a series or maybe even a kind of a broader study, perhaps in a dissertation. But your individual chapters, like individual article titles, you want those to be specific to the contents within that chapter, within that argument, if you can. Same thing then stringing along broad terms, like capitalism, socialism, and whatever other ism, right? If you can string along terms, but it doesn't necessarily tell folks what it is that your study is really about. Naming your subjects as kind of characters. We'll take a look at some examples in a moment, but your subject area and your focus, kind of your approach, really should be clear in that title that you're providing. If you are in a discipline where you make arguments or you are trying to clarify and nuance part of a conversation, you might want to suggest that argument or that clarify that kind of approach in your title. So suggest it if possible. So it could be, the benefits of something. As soon as you say benefits, then you're proposing that something's argumentative, right? That somebody else might say, well, maybe there's no benefit. Oh, see? Embed your title with searchable keywords. I don't have proof on this yet, but I suspect that it will be increasingly important as we rely on LLMs to make sure that just as with databases, we have matching key terms, subject areas that are relevant to our work so that folks can find our work. This one, I think, is just kind of obvious, but avoiding overly dense titles in the same way that you avoid creating overly dense prose or writing. Jargon tends to be off-putting. It can be related to a version of gatekeeping and keeping people out. And what you want to do with a title is invite people in. So overly dense titles, unless that specialized language is really necessary for a specialized audience, and there are times when it is, by the way, I would just avoid overly dense titles. Including a verb, this is wonderful because verbs allow for you to tell a story very quickly. So verbs are about what something does or maybe what something is. And by doing that, you can already set the stage for how people might be thinking about your topic. We'll look at an example for creating an abstract. Is a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. Just the verb is. Allows for us to understand the story that's going to be told just a little bit better from the title. And then avoid those kind of egocentric or esoteric kind of prove you're smart titles. Again, like the titles that may be overly dense, they may be showing off, and yet you might like them. Your friends might chuckle at them, your colleagues, right, who are in the know. but it's unlikely then that people who are moving by really quickly are going to be able to also chuckle or get the inside joke without reading your work, and kind of pull it down for other study. Um, Last year in Nature, there was a piece published about creating memorable titles. And again, thinking about memorable, but things that people want to grab onto. They found a link between tripartite titles or phrases and titles, and that makes them more likely to be read and cited, interestingly enough. So their own title is an example of a tripartite title: catchy, clear, concise, and then then a colon, excuse me. Three-part phrases boost research paper citations. So they're performing what it is that they're writing about. Here's an example: pattern perception and performance, tripartite phrases in academic paper titles. This is the study that they were pulling from. So it also repeats that tripart pattern. Ultimately, rhythmic patterns, the study says, enhance clarity by breaking down complex ideas into interconnected parts, creating rhythmic patterns that are memorable and aim to communicate multiple aspects of research concisely. Such phrases are commonly used in scholarly literature, with around 9% of the economics papers and 4% of life science papers and medicine papers in the sample containing tripart phrases in their titles. And you can see some of the examples that they give: envy, inequality, and fertility, informed trade, and stock price delay, housing adjustment costs, and macro dynamics. And notice that these are big phrases. They're not overly dense, and you can grab onto them and you can kind of see how they might fit together and tell you about a little bit about the topic that you would want to grab onto. So things like trade, development, and poverty-induced comparative advantage, market concentration, collusion, and social welfare in Mexico, a methodological update. And then you can take a look at the medicine and life science ones as well. You can take a look and just search academic book title formula #1 tripart subtitle. And there's this kind of way of formulating it. Yeah. And so I just love the anatomy of monograph subtitles: that women work in citizenship in the Pakistani diaspora, or landscape, space, and place in the contemporary Spanish culture. So you can see it. This has been a formula around for a while, and perhaps it's something that you have relied on as well. But now you know that the people have studied it, and it's just that it works. So what tripart title might you generate? I love this: eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Sheep hooves include only 2 toes. So what would be of interest to you? Images, 3 things. They're cute and clever. All right, so reverse outlines. Reverse outlines are a little less cute and a little less clever, and yet I would say that they will be, if you are building your skills and chops as a scholarly writer, they're going to be a key to you arranging your work and knowing how different genres operate. So reverse outlines, basically what they do is they allow for you to take away from an existing work. So it could be a published article. It could also be a draft of your own manuscript. You take away everything are the supporting kind of general information so that you can find the main points or the main ideas. You could do it paragraph by paragraph in an article. You can do it section by section. Most sections have a main point to that section. IMRAD, or where you have introduction, methods, results, and discussion. Those structured papers often have a clarifying section or sentence at the very beginning of each section, which then relate to the overall point of the paper. But basically, you're pulling away everything else that's not kind of a key point, and you get this bullet pointed style version of a paper, and it reveals the published paper's structures and contents. So you could do it with role models. My recommendation is do this with really good example papers. If they're questionable or you're not sure if they're good quality, I wouldn't try that. That's kind of like a varsity or kind of an expert kind of approach to kind of determine how it's structured. Start with ones that you know are well written. They read smoothly and you can find the points. And we'll take a look at one in a moment. You can also use this method for your own paper, as I mentioned. Reverse outlining works really well if you have lost your way in a manuscript. You're 10, 15 pages in and you're like, where am I? And what have I spoken? Have I covered this before? Going through and identifying the key points in each paragraph can be great help for you to identify how many points do you have going on. And if you have too many points per paragraph, if you have things out of order. So let's take a look and see how that operates. So basically, reverse outlining, it's kind of reveals the structure and the content. You can think about this like the specs right here on a chair. Um, Connection, style, you can kind of see how it is that things are shaped and put together as you pull it apart. An IMRAD article, for example, title, abstract, come across that the first, right? Introduction, methods, results, discussion, conclusion, references, and then there may be additional appendices or supplementary materials attached to it. Scholarly or thematic articles may operate slightly differently. So if you're in the humanities, for example, or do in a field where you do more analysis rather than original kind of experimental research, you might be working with a thematic and kind of scholarly article structure. Still, it's going to have that structure so it's recognizable within your field. And it will start also title, although abstracts, depending on your field, may be optional. Introduction, body, conclusion, and then references, etc. Case studies function slightly differently, and grant proposals also. Familiar structures, and depending on where you're submitting, there will be variations on these themes for the different types of structures. But within each one of these kind of larger structures, you can see and pull out for an individual article, what are the main points within that section. So let's take a look at an article. We're going to take a look at the wandering mind is an unhappy mind. Again, notice a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. We already know the argument of this paper. They're declaring something that when your mind wanders, you are less happy. That is still argumentative. They're declaring it, but it's a good story for us to kind of take a look at. We're going to reverse outline this. So it's a brevia piece. It takes a 30+ page article and then it condenses it. Brevia pieces were popular in science. I think the last years that they were doing is 2013, maybe. I use this as an example just because the topic sentences, the main points of the paragraphs for each section are at the very beginning of each paragraph, which makes it really easy for readers to follow. You're not required to put topic sentences or the main point of a paragraph at the beginning of a paragraph, but just think about where readers' eyes land, and that could be a great strategy for you if you find it works with your writing style and your approach. So let's take a look at the introduction. This is the very first paragraph. Again, it's a brevia piece, so it's a concentrated essay, and it's not an abstract yet, but we'll talk about how you can use this kind of structure, reverse outlining structure, to create an abstract. But their main point is that unlike other animals, human beings spend a lot of time thinking about what is not going on around them, contemplating events that happened in the past, might happen in the future, or will never happen at all. Indeed, stimulus independent thought, or mind wandering, nice little definition right there, appears to be the brain's default mode of operation. We have the main point about stimulus independent thought and that it appears to be a default operation. The appears is what's kind of the questionable, and so that they're going to go through and they're going to take us through their research in response to that. They set up some background and they give us some context for this. This is also part of an introduction, right? So lab experiments have revealed a great deal about cognitive and neural bases of mind wandering, but little about its emotional consequences in everyday life. This is the import and the reason why they had to do a specific study. And then they get to their approach. They're solving a problem about on being able to identify in daily life, not just in the lab. And how do you access kind of people's experiences about their minds wandering or not in daily life? So we solve this problem by developing a web application for the iPhone, which we use to create an unusually large database of real-time reports of thoughts, feelings, and actions of a broad range of people as they went about their daily activities. All right. So now we get to what it is that they did. So this is their methodology and kind of how they put everything together. So yes, and this is all one sentence, by the way, this entire a paragraph except for one sentence of the paragraph is a sentence. But I don't recommend doing that very often. It's dense, but I'm going to read through everything except for what's in parentheses, just because that's the additional kind of information that we don't really need to have to understand the main point of this paragraph and the methods that they used. So to find out how often people's minds wander, what topics they wandered to, and how those wanderings affected their happiness, we analyzed samples from 2,250 adults who were randomly assigned to answer a happiness question answered on a continuous sliding scale from very bad to very good, an activity question answered endorsing one or more 22 activities adapted from the day reconstruction method, and a mind-wandering question answered with one of four options: no, yes, something pleasant, yes, something neutral, or yes, something unpleasant. All right, so that's the methodology, all kind of like squished together. And what did they do? Let's get to their findings. Their findings at first, people's minds wandered frequently, regardless of what they were doing. Second, multi-level regression revealed that people were less happy when their minds were wandering than when they were not, and this was true during all activities, including the least enjoyable. And three, what people were thinking about was a better predictor of their happiness than what they were doing. That's the big picture of all their findings. Notice point, 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 and within there is elaboration. The nature of people's activities explained within variance, happiness between people and their mind wandering explained. So notice that they give explanation, but the main point, the main takeaway is within that topic sentence. And that's really what we're looking for when we do a reverse outline. We want to be able to identify all those kind of key points. It's the structure of the paper. It's like the skeleton that holds the body together, right? It holds all the meat and everything else, if you take all that off, you got the skeleton. And then their final concluding point, although we don't really get a discussion so much, we don't get nor do we get much of a literature review in a Brevia piece, right? All of that is taken out, but their concluding point is, in conclusion, a human mind is a wandering mind, and a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. Also note, not only is it clever and engaging, how they've kind of clearly stated their findings, it also matches their title in this one. So it kind of reiterates and it kind of brings back and kind of recalls their main point. All right, so let's take a look at this and see how we could pull it into an abstract and create an abstract. We're going to talk about a summary abstract, which summarizes the content of an article. This is an MRAD style article. It has an introduction, methodology, results, and discussion and conclusion. That's what we've been looking at with the Brevia piece. And reverse outlines can help you craft abstracts. So you can go through and craft your reverse outline of your own article and identify what your key points are and pull those out and just see how well does that fit together. That could also be a great test, by the way, to make sure that your larger article, as it's written, is clear, that it's trackable, that it follows the IMRAD structure, perhaps, that your points are landing well. If you can pull them out and just as we did with the Brevia piece, chances are it'll land well with your readers. Abstracts ultimately are increasingly important for pitching and introducing your research in a manuscript. A number of the LLM kind of literature review softwares rely on abstracts, by the way. So I think that they will be increasingly important through the AI generation and as the AI kind of technology moves forward. That's awkward, but you get my point. So just as we read through all of those first sentences, here I've just pulled them together so that you can see we have an intro to the main point: stimulus independent thought or mind wandering. We have information about the lab experience revealing very little and how that's crucial, and this fills a gap. So they have a methodology, right, that they've used. They have findings and then a conclusion. This is about 179 words, depending on the journal that you're submitting to or the constraints that you will be given on your own abstract. Usually there's a word constraint limit. So it could be anywhere between 75, 80, which is pretty short, to 250, I don't know. I haven't seen them much longer than that, but again, it depends on your field. And so I would not be surprised if there are some variations on what's expected in word count. Let's take a look at the structure that's kind of underneath that when we think about the logic and the arrangement of the points and how you can take a reverse outline and you can identify what's the overarching problem. And so we'll pull this out from a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. The overarching problem is that we know little impacts of mind wandering and its impact on our happiness. The specific problem that they addressed, though, was measuring the extent and impact of mind wandering in daily life. So that was their kind of contribution to the field. There had been laboratory experiments before, but nothing in daily life. What was not known is the extent and the impact. The objective was to determine and measure the extent and effect on happiness. Their approach was to survey in daily life using that app. And then their key findings were that it did impact happiness, that if your mind wanders, you're less happy than you would be otherwise. You can use reverse outlining to revise your writing. As I noted, you can take a draft of an article that you are working on that seems to have gotten off track or, kind of sideways. You're just not sure if it's doing what you want it to do. And you can use reverse outlining to review your draft to see how complete is it, how many sections you've got, to identify those topic points. And then what you can do is copy all of those topic sentences and those points into just a separate document. So they're not all highlighted or just stuck in your document. You can go through and identify them, but then put them all someplace else. So just like we did with the Brevia piece, you can pull them out and then you can see them arranged like we did with the abstract. And consider the structure, the arrangement of those ideas. What needs to be cut? What needs to be rearranged or revised or added? And then return to that draft and bring only what works. If there are sections where you realize, oh, wait, that is kind of a side point, or that really isn't relevant, or this is a repetition, use that information to go back and then revise your draft. Reorganize things, take things out, add things in as needed. You can also use that very same method to tighten a specific paragraph. Usually paragraphs have a flow to them. They are part, of course, of larger sections and of larger documents. So when you have the building blocks that go from words to sentences to paragraphs, sometimes by the time we get through a paragraph, if it's really dense and there's a lot of information in there, it might be difficult for you to identify what's the single key idea. Do I have more than one idea? If you have more than one idea per paragraph, you'll want to break that paragraph apart and create two. So just identify the key idea in each paragraph, copy those sentences into a separate document, and consider if the other sentences elaborate and explain that point. So that you can use that same kind of system, but on a smaller scale for individual paragraphs. And that allows for you then to kind of build or transition from key ideas as well. All right, folks. Well, that's it for this webinar, but a little bit of information useful for you to apply practically. Just try it out, see what's working in your current manuscripts, your drafts, but also seek out good model papers and reverse outline them and see how they do it. And until we meet again, may your writing be brief, frequent, low stress, and highly rewarding. Thanks so much.